I got 3rd place with Highlander at the World Championship of Vanguard. And I figured we'd go over the deck profile. First of all, shout out to WCC, amazing team, but most specifically Noman. I actually didn't test at all with the rest of the WCC this time. Like, we were all very split up, so it was literally like 70% me testing against myself and then 30% against Noman. So Noman's always been there since the very start. So yeah, big shout out to Noman. Shout out to 50 cards, because otherwise I could not play this deck with this much ridiculous bling. So use the code Solemn for a discount. A shout out to my locals, Hermela and Aalst. I wish I went more often. And also shout out to ZeroDamageGaming.com. Use the code Solemn for a discount. Also shout out to Michael, Team Best Girl right now, doing the filming. You want to say anything?
Yeah, hold on.
I've been waiting for a fucking hour for this dick.
Okay, you having fun, man?
I'm having fun.
Very importantly, why the fuck am I on Highlander? There were like a lot of decks at first that were okay. Like, I was like, there's Highlander, there's Steam Maiden, there's Grand Blue. And at first, I was also coping a little on DI, but that shit just sucked. Like, anyone thinking that DI fucking sucks. So then Grand Blue gradually just fell off, and then finally, it was just Highlander or Steam Maiden. Highlander is like seen as the high roll deck. You know, people were saying, oh, if you don't draw Katar, the deck sucks, blah, blah, blah. And Steam Maiden is the more consistent one. The issue, however, is that I felt that if I took Steam Maiden and I was paired into another Steam Maiden, then it became just like, oh, go first, who gets the better ride down, blah, blah, blah. And that wasn't really up to me. So I felt that if I could make Highlander as consistently as possible and as reliably as possible make it win the ride down game, then I could beat both the Mirror and Steam Maiden. Just make it consistent with just a slightly less high ceiling. So this is yeah, hyper consistent Highlander with less ceiling. I don't know, it's a bad name, but you know, deal with it. Highlander basically has a billion ways to high roll. You have Reindeer, which is your primary ride target, but you can also draw Katar, which is also broken, because then you get, you know, billion easy searches. You also have like a bunch of targets for Reindeer that you can find. So like you could high roll into Alara, which gets you a full field. You could high roll into Pearl Sisters and sometimes auto win from that, but sometimes you lose regardless. You can high roll into fucking Ange and just auto win of that. There's so many little auto wins. Oh, also because the deck is constantly thinning so much, you also hit your over trigger far more often than other decks. And once you do hit that over trigger, you have 10k on every single rear. And again, like, you scale out of control. The deck's absolutely insane that way. Also, the deck has like Klasina, which is basically like Enterana at home. It's literally Enterana discount. We only have one. Gear has like a billion. So again, like, there's basically a billion ways to high roll. And so even if you don't have Katar, you can just high roll in different ways and it's good enough. As long as you build the deck, you know, in the consistent variant, let's say. First of all, we have our 4 Reindeer. It's our primary ride target. This is basically the engine. Like, I get away with only playing 1 Katar, spoiler alert, because I'm like, fuck it, I don't need to see Katar. I'll just play completely on the fact that Reindeer is also a ridiculous high roll. So you want to play 4 because you always want to ride it. And you also always want to draw more copies, because as you ride down, you start running out of them. So like, you ride it the first time, it goes away. You ride it the second time, it goes away. And you know, the less copies you have, the less reliable that's going to happen. Then I have 1 Katar. So this is very controversial. I know a lot of people already disagree with this, but here is why. The biggest issue I had with Katar in this deck is that if you didn't draw Katar, which is when people say this deck sucks, it also meant that there's 2 Katar in the deck. So if you ride up into Reindeer and you go attack and then you discard 2, so you're now -2, you check top 10 and there's 2 Katars in that top 10, you are done. You can go eat. Like, you can go to the food court, you can drop, it's over. This deck auto loses when that happens. Because not only did you just give your opponent a free first stride, you also went -2 to do it and you didn't even have a turn. Like, you just attacked with Vanguard once. Not drawing Katar obviously sucks because you don't get your free 10,000 searches, but it sucks even more because you can randomly auto lose. Now you could think, oh, but that's like a low percentage, because I also talked to a very good player, Johan, about this. Like, you only have like a 4% chance of that happening or whatever. But the thing is, if you are trying ride downs multiple times every single game, and you're going into worlds where everyone's on Steam Maiden and Highlander, that means you're gonna have like this chance of happening maybe 40 times in a day. So are you gonna like take a 4% chance 40 times in a row? Obviously not 40, you know, hyperbole, but like, are you gonna take that shot that many times? And even worse, if you, let's say you don't whiff, like you check top 10, you don't find double Katar, you find like Lara or Aneska, you ride into a Lara or Aneska, you check top 10, and then there's a double Katar, now you still have a vanilla turn. So it's just so many ways that this deck sucks dick when you don't draw Katar and you're playing 2, because you can randomly auto lose or lose all of your tempo. So I went down to 1, because that meant I could first of all cut every single card you normally search with her. You're like, yeah, well, I'm not drawing her anywhere, so whatever, you know, I can cut a bunch of cards, you'll notice. And I will also never ever brick on checking double Katar in my top 10. So you're basically safe from that, and now from there you can basically build fully around Reindeer, and then when you do draw her, cool, now you get like a cool little auto win. So yeah, for that reason 1, I think 1 is correct. I know it's controversial. You do also accept though that if you're playing the mirror and your opponent, you know, starts seeing their 2 Katars in their hand and you don't, yeah, it's gonna be really hard to win that way because they will out-tempo the living fuck out of you. But for every, you know, one of those high rolls, you will have 3 games where you're super happy you're playing this instead, in my opinion. That's why 4 and 1. Next, for the targets that Reindeer needs to find, we have Lara, which builds a whole field out of nowhere. We have Olivia, which restands everything. We have Aneska, which creates an Excel, Protect, and Force. Now, I know a lot of people are not playing all 3. Some people are not playing Lara because they're like, well, I already have a field, I have to overcall, that's kind of garbage. Some people are not playing Olivia because they think, oh, I already have Lupina, and maybe I don't have a field yet or whatever, you know, they think that's bad. Some people don't play Aneska because they're like, once I'm playing Heltrada, it's gonna suck because then it's not really pushing in any way. The thing is, they're all broken at like different points in the game, and if you check top 10 with Reindeer, you never want to see like heals, you know? If you see a Lara, it's never gonna be bad. If you see a Nesca in the ride down game, it's gonna be fucking broken. Like, if I'm playing against another Highlander player and they don't get a Nesca and I do on the turn 3, it's fucking over. I have extra attacks with the Excel circle, I have protects to stop their Vanguard attacks, I have double force markers, which is just gonna scale like crazy in the late game. So even though this is like mid on the Heltrada turns, it's so fucking broken in the ride down games that, like, in my opinion, you still had to play it. Then this, of course, is broken on Heltrada. This one is sometimes broken. The way I make this card like extra good is by attacking with the one side of rears first. I can always bounce them with Tirua, and I can also call over them with Lara. So this way, you're not actually going to lose offensive pressure because it's actually going to create an extra attack just like a Lupina would, but, you know, less good. All 3 are really good. All 3 should be played, in my opinion. Then I have Ange. This is the very best thing to find. If you Reindeer into Ange, you win. Like, you created a field, first of all, like you just called a field, right? And then you're gonna get them all back. You already attacked with them. You're gonna be up forces again, just like with Aneska, where you had like an extra force. Now you have an extra force from Ange. And then she's gonna search your one fucking Katar if you didn't find it yet. You basically get access to everything. If your grade 2 was Aqua, because you're riding down, now the Aqua can bounce the Katar, and now you have her in your hand and like you have instant access to it. But even if you don't, like, just the fact that you get to bounce and search, you might even find like Betty with this, and then Betty can find you your next Reindeer or your Katar or your Pearl Sisters. Like, this is just broken. Also, very important, these 2 can also let you ride down if you didn't draw any ride down card, because this one can search Myrtoa and another card that we'll get to, and this one could randomly sack into it. Lupina, basically Olivia at home. Like, she's not as good as Olivia, obviously, but I would rather play 2 Olivia than 1 Olivia. Then 1 Tirua. This is basically Ange at home. Like, the restand is good, but you don't use it that often, but it is really broken on the Heltrada turn. It's really broken to find off Ange. And again, like, if you swing with one side first, as I always will if I have the field, then I can just ride into this, add them back, and now I have a way bigger hand than my opponent. But yeah, this is mostly like, if you're going for a kill on like an Ange turn, this is really insane. If you're going for a kill on an Heltrada turn, the restand on the Vanguard is usually iffy because you lose your final drive check. Regardless, you gotta play it. Like, if I had to rank them in the ride down game, it's like Ange is the best one, then it's Aneska, then it's Tirua, and then it depends on, you know, if you have a field or you don't have a field. So this is like the ranking and how good they would be. But Ange is always the best, unless you don't have a field, in which case Aneska would be best. And one final ride target is Ange. I know a lot of people were starting to cut this, and I get why. I don't think this card is like particularly crazy, but it is one way to ride down, and also it can add cards back to your hand. So it's kind of like an even shittier version of Tirua and Ange, you know? So this is like the best best one, this is the second best one, and this is like the shit one. But it will still allow you to grab stuff back, which is really useful, especially because this one doesn't care about if it's triggers or not. Since I'm never gonna brick on Katar, I always want to have a target that lets me ride down. So either I draw it or I sack into it, and Ange is dead. Also, this was the card that used to be Katar. So when I was testing, I was checking how often was I drawing this and wishing it was the Katar it used to be, and how often would I have auto lost from checking like these two in my top 10. And I was auto losing on this far more often than I was actually drawing this, because, well, yeah, you're gonna draw cards, but like checking top 10 twice, if you're doing Lara and Eska, so you do like twice on one turn, you're gonna see way more of your deck than, you know, just having drawn cards by turn 3. I do think this is like the weakest slot in the deck, so if you want to cut something, it might be that. Now for grade 2s, I have 5 ride targets. As you know, in the Vanguard Mastery course on zerodamagegaming.com, use the code Solemn for a discount. I always want to have 5 ride targets. So we have Glacina, we have Aqua, we have Lizalot, we have Seria. All of these are just really good early game, but then once you start riding down, they will also trigger because they have Vanguard on-play skills. So Glacina, again, is Enterana at home. It's a +2. This will let you bounce stuff back from your field, which is really insane. This will get you a free card on the board. It's not as good, but it's still something, and this will filter more. And then the 5th one that almost no one plays is Mirada. Mirada is basically Glacina at home. Like, this is gonna be a CB1 to draw a card, which doesn't sound like much, but if you're consistently digging for cards, and those cards also start digging, you're gonna have way more games where you have your Reindeer and Katar than others. And also, if you start getting into the ride down game, which the Highlander Mirror and the Steam Maiden games usually are, then you are basically going +1 every single turn, which is fucking insane. Glacina also has the issue where if you start riding down into her, you start running out of soul. So you can only really do this twice, and depending on which ride down you're using, you might only be able to do it once. Whereas this, you can just, you will have the CB very easily in the ride down game because both players are giving each other damage. So that's 5 really good ride down targets. And again, like in the course, card roll wise, the fact that these are all the same thing, even though they have different names, is very important to understand. Because people are like, oh, Highlander is like Saki because it's all one-offs. But if all those one-offs actually perform the exact same function, then you don't have to see this as like 4 different cards that you sack into. It's just like 5 different cards fulfilling the same role. Then we have our other one-offs. We have Pearl Sister. Of course, you have to run this. Sometimes you just sack. Sistico is insane. This card has multiple functions. So first of all, it sends cards back to your deck, specifically like your ride targets, which is really good. But sometimes it might also send something else. Like, for example, I'm playing Bikun in matchups where Bikun is insane, like NLK, Dimension Police, Spike Brother, Green on Max Max. I will like send it back and then Katar it back to my hand, assuming, you know, I got Katar. So that's really good for that. But the stun is actually also insane. Like, certain matchups, you will just win because you stun something crucial. Also, if you get into a ride down face-off between 2 Highlander decks, the other Highlander player is gonna be using Yuika to do that stuff. And so you can just literally stun their Yuika with Sistico and it's fucking over. They just lost their ride down, unless they sack into Justine or they found a Yuika with Katar, because then they already have Katar in their hand to find a Justine. So yeah, a long tirade, but basically like regular Highlander versus this deck, if you can Sistico their Yuika, it's probably GG because they can no longer ride down. Then we have Melty. I know no one plays this card, and this is literally Katar at home. I started realizing that if you're not going into stride games, which the ride down games aren't, you know, then Sandy, Spica, Honoli, Pumo, all those cards are vanillas at that point. They're just shield and rear guards. And so what Katar is really doing in those ride down games is going plus. And the plus is going to be attackers, but it's also going to be cards you add back with Ange. But this card also just goes plus. And if you start bouncing this with Yuika or with Ange and so forth, this is once again just going to be a +1 every single turn. So where Katar makes a free field because it makes herself plus Aqua plus Yuika, or something along those lines, depending on what you drew, she's going to make herself +1 card. So this is +2 to field in terms of pure just raw advantage when you're pushing in the grade 2 game, whereas this is just a 2-card combo. So this is 3, this is 2. It's way worse, obviously. It also lets you dig on turn 2. So I very often use this to dig on turn 2 to get more cards. So as you noticed, this deck is already running way more diggers than other cards. Mirada is already more than other decks. This is already more than other decks, and there's going to be way more you're going to see. So this deck constantly just tries to dig, 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 dig. We're desperate for Reindeer. We're desperate for Katar. And that's also the biggest issue with Highlander always, is the fact that they fail to find Reindeer because they only have 1 grade 3 researcher and they barely run diggers because they want all the value that Katar can find, and I just don't give a fuck. I cut all that. I'm just digging because I want to find my reindeers. So yeah, digging, free plussing, Katar at home. Then we have another spicy card. We have Eleanor. So this is just on attack. Soul Blast 2 gets 15k at the end of the battle, goes to the top of your deck. This is a Soul Blast, meaning you can Soul Blast out your reindeer and then you can ride down at the end of the turn. Then it will go to the top of your deck, and since you're riding down into one of this, or this, your 5 write downs, all of these actually retrieve her back. So she will draw your Eleanor then. She will check top 3, and if you need her, you grab her. If you don't care. She will recall her. She will, assuming you have another thing on board, bounce, draw, and then you can discard whatever you want. And this same thing. So what's really important about this is that you can keep your Eleanor safe. Like if Steam Maiden is running like Karunta or something like that, and they get rid of your Eureka, you lose your ride downs, unless of course you can like Katar into Justine. So by being able to keep her safe, except for with Lizelot, you can now ensure that you have your ride down safely. Again, assuming like that they're doing Karunta and that you're playing ride down games and so forth. But yeah, so this way you just have like a consistent safe engine to be able to ride down, assuming that you don't have the complete nut. Also very important about this is that it is searchable. So if you, Myrtoa is already in damage or you drew it or something like that, Ange and Laura can still find her, so you can still ride down that way. So you can find Klasina, you can find Myrtoa, you can find Ange as like direct ride downs, and then Laura and Ange V can both find Myrtoa or this to ride down as well. So you have like so many ways to ride down, it's almost impossible to not have it. Noman played the same list as me, and the only difference for him was he cut the Melty for Henrietta, which was my other ride down card I tried before, but I just preferred the plus. But both are fine. But so as you can see, like I'm just desperate for being able to ride down very, very consistently. So that is the grade 2s. As you notice, there's no Sandy in here because like my thinking was literally we're just going to go into an event where everyone's either on Highlander or Steam Maiden, so we're literally just never striding. Like the joke with Noman was like, oh, I love playing V series. It's not like we're touching our G zone. That's basically what these decks were doing. Like we were not fucking striding. So Sandy was dead, Puma was dead, Honolly was dead, and so forth. Now obviously Steam Maiden can ride up, like that stuff happens, but usually if they ride up, they are going to lose purely from the tempo loss of being Heltralad. Sometimes that doesn't work out, you know, shit happens, but in general, it is so much more worth it that you're not running these bricks. Again, assuming you're going to Worlds, which is where the whole meta is going to be the same shit. This would be different for another event, in my opinion. Then we have more thinning. These are all the cards that are thinning the deck in my grade 1 lineup, so all fulfilling the same role. So this is the grade 3 searcher. I'm hoping everyone runs this. This is Betty, checks top 7 for anything, fucking broken. This is Mernil. This one is run less often. This basically allows you to send back grade 4s or 3s you drew, like your reindeer right targets, and then replace them with other stuff. So you're digging for more stuff, which is either more diggers or reindeers and so forth. And then also she gives 10k to the thing you rewrote. That's not as important. It does come up, of course, but it's mostly just for the digging, because also if you have to discard a Lupina, Olivia, Ange, or Laura or something like that to then Sistico it back to deck, that's really cringe. Whereas if you just, you know, place this, you can send it back instantly. It's not as awkward. This could also be Aurora if you prefer that, because then you're always going to be able to tin, but I like the fact that I had the utility of just sending back whatever. This one is also a bit weird. I know a lot of people were on the other girl that can boost anything and then sends even grade 4s back, which is really good. You know, sometimes I have this and I'm like, fuck, I wish I could send back Aneska, but for me it's way too crucial that I can draw 2. Again, I want to dig. I want to find these reindeers, and I also need to keep up with the fact that some people are having access to double Katar and I don't. So where Katar, once again, like this is only 2 cards of value, this is 3 cards of value, this is like making up the difference there. Also very often, if I was drawing like garbage grade 3s that I didn't want to ride, I would throw them away. That's a hard minus. Now I have a grade 3 in drop and I can draw an extra card, so the hard minus is gone. So Steza is very crucial for that. And also, again, if you're playing like just a ride down mirror, you're gonna have so much CB that the CB never comes up. Radka, once again, just more thinning. And then Myrtoa, I think this is the most overrated card in Vanguard history. So she's really broken in the fact that like she can do a lot of things, but when you're only going for the ride down mirror shenanigans and not the deck out loops and like all of the fancy plays with Heltrada, she kind of just becomes like a let my opponent draw a card, which I don't really like. But I'm still running her because thinning is important. I think the ceiling of my deck is so high that like if I plus, it's better than my opponent's plus, and also it's a ride down card. But if this card said like on V and on R, Soul Blast 1, draw 1, discard 1, that would be better in my opinion than what she has right now, purely for, you know, the role of what I'm trying to do here, because I just don't like my opponent plussing. But I know there's like a lot of people doing like fancy stuff with it. The only thing where this is like really insane though is against Nightmare Dolls, because if you do a Heltrada turn with like 2 rear guards and they use their G guard to like suck something into Soul, at least Murtoa can like keep that safe. Also against Naru you have like one thing, so like you can bind this off Impede rather than losing the things you call off Heltrada. It's cool for that. Justine does the same thing in that situation. Still had to run it, but I would have wished we had some other grade 1 that did this properly. None are as good as her. She also, beyond the role of thinning, she also has the role of ride down, like I said, so you can either find her with Ange or Lara, or you can just find her in your top 10. So again, this is also why this is good, purely because you can just ride down so reliably. But then for other ride down cards, we have Justine and we have Yuika. So this you can discard for the reindeer cost and then Soul Blast out, and now you ride down, easy. And this can just bounce something on your field to then also ride down. Now if you have Katar, that's the best thing to do. You know, you go Katar and Yuika bounces back Katar, and the next turn you row down, and the next turn you can use your Katar. But what's also really insane is because I have so many things that thin, I can consistently call them in front of her and then also like start reusing that thinning. So something I did constantly, for example, was calling Melty with Yuika if I had the 2 in my hand, and then I could just bounce her back, and then I could use her again and again and again, and that was like also endless value. So once again, Katar at home was putting in work with her, but it's mostly just being able to ride down. Once you're into like Heltrada turns and so forth, this is just dog shit. Like yeah, she gives 5k, it's cute and all, but it's really not that good. This is purely for ride downs. Though I do have to say this on Heltrada is pretty cool. Like I said, if you have these 2, you can play around certain G guards that otherwise you couldn't play around. So there's 3 cards with the role of ride down on top of all the other stuff I already showed. Then we have our Pearl Sister, because well, it's Pearl Sister, sometimes you can auto win and sometimes you don't auto win. Then we have one Resius. This is the only card that survived the cut of like defensive bullshit cards. You know, like I said, Puma was out, Honolulu was out, Sandy was out. All of these cards are insane, and obviously finding them with Katar is like really good. But again, in your ride down games, they weren't really that good. And even outside of ride down games, like Honolulu is very awkward in a lot of matchups, but Resius was crucial for me because I was terrified of some copium people on NLK. And against NLK, being able to go +10 to your Vanguard to shut off both Assassin and the column's barrow calls, because those numbers are always dog shit except for Rhodia or something, is just too important. So like if I could, against NLK, I would always Katar into Resius. Of course, in other matchups, it is also really solid. But so this is like the only card that was so insanely high value that was like, fine. As a defensive card, I'll have something for these late games. And this was like easily the most broken one. Like if you were at gunpoint forced to choose between Pumo, Sandy, Honolulu, and this, it would always be this in my opinion. So it was this one. Then we have Rollock. Rollock is insane because, well, you're always riding down. Also against Greed on Max Packs, it is like insane because I'm not playing grade 1 PG, so I have nothing to search against those decks. Same thing against NLK, I have nothing to search against those decks. So this is my way to still have a searchable PG that's not taking up draw PG slots. And yeah, it's winning me ride down games. Secondly, speaking of winning ride down games, I have another thing. I have Bikun. Bikun, once again, I was really afraid of people coping with NLK. I was also afraid of people playing Spike. Spike is like really solid. Greed on Max turns are disgusting. This is actually the only reason I survived the Greed on Max turns, so shout out Bikun. And yeah, it's also just something searchable of Katar. It's like a grade 1 PG that's not a grade 1 PG. Also really good in the mirror. In the mirror, it is just the free PG and makes you win that ride down game as well. So now I have like 2 searchable free PGs. So this is basically like, in the mirror, this is another Rollock. So I can play 2 Rollock and keep the deck Highlander. Then for triggers, you might think, oh, triggers, like who cares? My trigger lineup is fucking weird, so I'll show you. I'm playing 3 of the stride crit because this thing is like really crucial. You do want to have like the easy strides. I kind of wish it was 4, but there's a reason why it's not. So I'm playing a bunch of one-offs. So I'm playing these crits are one-offs. I'm playing 1D draw. I'm playing an over trigger and a crit sentinel, and then the rest is not one-offs, but we'll get to that. The reason is I'm playing the Federica Stride, which checks for Highlander in your top 10. Now, obviously, if there's still reindeers, draw PGs, or heals in your deck, then you're not going to try and do that, but it's more so if you get close to deck out, the odds of you being Highlander is really high. I learned this from Hearthstone, where decks that weren't Highlander, but they were control decks, were playing Zephyros and Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, because that required a Highlander deck. But so, when they got close to deck out, which all these control decks were doing, they would automatically be Highlander. You know, if there's 2 cards in your deck, it's gonna be Highlander if they're not 2 fucking reindeers. And so by at least having these triggers, I had less odds of my final 4 cards or so not being Highlander. Also, sometimes I would literally just be like, okay, fuck. Like Heltrada requires 3 discards, and so sometimes you don't have those. You got rushed or something like that, and maybe you didn't even ride reindeer, you know, everything went wrong. You're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna try and sack with Federica. I did that often in NLK against testing, where sometimes you just had to throw away your whole hand. And so Federica, if you don't know, I'll quickly show. This is literally just a Katrina. Like, in terms of like output, this is kind of Katrina. This then at least lets you play the game a little bit. Now, of course, if you still have a bunch of heals and so forth in your deck, you're not gonna do that. But it's just like this card, the soul crit, is really so insignificant that it's fine to turn your crits Highlander just for the Federica payoff. And then a draw, I wanted to run the draw anyway. Like, even before I was running Federica and when these were like these types of crits, I was still running this already, because this deck is constantly discarding so much that you're like desperate to just have empty cards to discard, both for Reindeer and Eltrada. So this was good. Now, of course, you're afraid of deck out kind of still, but you gotta balance it somehow. I think this was still really important. Together with 3 draw PGs, so I actually have 4 draws, which I really enjoy. It really helps with all the discarding the deck does. Crit Sentinels are also really good, because in the ride-down games, all of the decks right now that are like relevant don't actually have huge numbers. Like, it's usually 40 max, and so Crit Sentinels are almost always basically also Rolox. So these 3 are basically the 3 Rolox that like Nightmare Doll and so forth would usually play, but then, you know, different. Also, because it's a different name, like you even help your Federica even more. Against like DP, because I only have 3 PGs, that kind of sucks, but I have the big one anyway, so it's fine. So that's why, you know, my triggers aren't just like the 4-4-1-3 kind of stuff. That's why I wanted to go over it a little bit. And then we have 4 of the heal guard, because yeah, I mean, I at one point was even coping with like 1 V heal, so that like my Federicas would go off even more. But heal guards are way too important in the mirror and the Steam Maiden, because if they go first, you want to be at low damage, so you want to like go heal guard on their big turn, let's say their big first turn, and hopefully you're at low damage so you can like stabilize. So this was too important, but like I was coping like this at one point, but it was bad. It was just incorrect. Also, because of Steza, like if you drew the grade 0 heal, then you can't Steza it back, so this was really too important. And also, sometimes you stride with these. Like I said, like Heltrada is a discard 3, so if you had to discard 2 to be able to stride, that also sucks. Finally, a Shizuku starter. It's not just because she's SP, I also played her because if I play her, people don't know if I'm not playing Shiratsuyu, and so that way they might not deny me. So that's the main deck. So next for the G-Zone, we have a triple Heltrada. Now, to be honest, the third one virtually never comes up. I think even testing it was like once or twice, but again, I would rather, you know, have it and not need it than the other way around. There are grind like situations where this is possible in the mirror. If they instantly rode up and then you have to like gradually start whittling away, it can come up, but it's very rare. Like this, if you don't have the money for it or something, this is not that needed. Then we are playing, like I said, this card. So this is for once, again, like I said, like Zephyros and Alexstrasza control decks that are in Highlander and Hearthstone. This card is also just automatically gonna be live when you're close to deck out. And sometimes when you don't have the discard for this and you can't do Megiddo, you're like, okay, fuck it, we might just have to, you know, fuck it, we ball and try. Sometimes it'll fail, but you know, at least your trigger lineup kinda helps a little bit with that. Then I have double Tirua. This is for the deck out games. Like I said, like deck out can exist in the mirror if your opponent instantly rode up, or if the Steam Maiden player notices you're getting close to deck out and they instantly ride up. So that does exist, but it is very rare. Like I haven't strode this very often. This can also be useful in like the weirdest, most random matchups you can't even imagine, because this also doesn't need like discards. So it's very possible that you have field that you can put away and that you don't have discard to do this instead. But that also relies you not being on Reindeer, because if you're on Reindeer, I think a regular Reindeer turn is actually better than a Tirua turn, weirdly enough. It's also possible though that you ran out of targets. Like if all the Reindeer ride targets are on bottom and you didn't have Katar to shuffle, or they're in graveyard or drop zone, or yeah, graveyard or drop zone, same shit, damage zone, then this can be better, but it's very rare. It's not the most important card. If you want to cut one of these, that's, you know, not the end of the world. Then we have one of this. This barely ever comes up. Like, it exists, I'm sure, but in testing, I think I ended up having 200 something games, and I think I strode it once. But you still want to have it just in case. But this was way better back when we had like Highlander doing all kinds of Katar plays with Alk, but then you didn't have Aina for some reason, then you would go this. Then this, just in case we can for some reason get into Link Joker and not use this or something. This, I'm very happy that it looks nice right now. Then we have Amoris. So this is basically doing the same thing as Elprina in normal Highlander decks, but because I'm running so much Soul Blasting in this deck, my Elprina will never be live, so I have Amoris instead. It's definitely worse than Elprina, but it's not taking Soul. But once again, I used it in testing maybe twice, and beyond that, it is gonna be just a beautiful call target for Federica. Then we have an actually important card, it's Megidodo. Like I said, Heltrada requires a discard cost that is like huge. Sometimes you will simply not have it, like your opponent will bash your skull in, you will be left with one card in hand, it's the Reindeer, and then just going discard Reindeer, going to Megido, and just cycling all those rearguards you called into that, well, double force marker circle is usually gonna be enough regardless. And then if you lose your G-Zone and they didn't die, and you go back down into Reindeer because of that, vanilla Reindeer turns without striding are still fucking insane, so it's totally fine. G-Guardians, I have 2 Citron, which calls out Ricios or Katar or Betty. I'm playing 2 of the add-back girl, she's absolutely cracked. Too bad she costs a counterblast. For that reason, we are playing one of this. This is like basically, this is this at home. Once again, just a garbage version of that, but it doesn't cost CB, so sometimes it comes up. And then we have 1 Sandy, this gets big sometimes. Like, sometimes you don't want to minus from your hand with Citron, and you don't have anything to bounce with this, and this is just a worse version of this. That's when you go into Sandy. So that is the G-Zone in the main deck, and that's just the whole profile. Very excited to have this 3rd place at Worlds. Hope you found this interesting. If you still need cards, go to 50cards.shop and use the code Solemn. If you need a beautiful playmat, go to zerodamagegaming.com and use the code Solemn. If you want to get better at a game, go to zerodamagegaming.com. And Noman's having fun over there. Noman gets a shout. Noman's really cool. Follow him on Twitter. And
Pick me!
Yeah, he's real cool. But yeah, thanks everyone. Subscribe, and I will see you soon.
I've been waiting for a fucking hour for this dick.
Ciao.